This is episode 300. 300 episodes of recovery. My journey from numbing to freedom. I cannot believe that I am here. When I started this podcast, it never occurred to me. I didn't even think into the future. But the fact that I'm doing 300 episodes is just fucking mind blowing to me. So, this episode is going to be different than other episodes in a number of ways. So, number one, I normally record in my closet and I'm recording in my office. Number two, I normally only do audio recordings, and this is actually a video and audio recording. And I'm doing that because I don't want to be in my closet for an hour. And I figured if I'm going to record on the computer in my office, I might as well do it by video because who wants to see a video in my closet? And because it's such a milestone, I thought it would be nice to have it on video. And number three, it's going to be way longer than normal. So, what I'm going to be doing is sharing the long version of my story. It will be much like I share in a meeting, except that when I share in a meeting, I'm at a specific fellowship and I talk about only my recovery in that fellowship. Whereas here, I am going to be talking about both of my programs of recovery. I'm going to share a number of tools and then a bunch of lessons that I learned and all that sort of stuff. So, if you are someone who has been listening for a very long time, you know what? Even if you haven't been, and you have not done a review of this podcast, please, please, please take the time to do it now. As far as I know, Apple is the only platform on which you can do an actual written review. But you don't have to be an Apple user. You can Google how to do it. I've done it for other podcasters and I'm not a Google user. If you listen on Spotify, please give me a 5-star rating. Like, honestly, this is how we get more people to listen to the podcast because it gets fed to them when it gets higher and higher ratings. And if you've gotten recovery and if you've gotten lessons learned from my podcast, then you know there are other people who can. So please do this in celebration of my 300th episode, if not for any other reason. All right. So, that being said, I'm just going to get started. So, I have been numbing since I was a baby. So, I sucked my thumb until I was 10. I started smoking cigarettes when I was 13. I'm not sure what was happening in between 10 and 13, but I'm sure I found some way to numb. I started smoking weed at 14. I also found my clitoris and started masturbating pretty much daily until I was well into my 30s. At the age of 14, I started drinking alcohol, beer specifically at 16, and then I think of it as the switch sort of flipping for me to going from being a normal eater to being a compulsive overeater when I was about 22. And that happened when I quit smoking, and I put quit smoking in air quotes because I literally quit smoking for 6 months. But then I continued to smoke secretly and hide it and lie about it for 20-ish years. And except if I was out in public with friends who smoked and we were drinking, then I would smoke publicly. So I've had a history of substance use my entire life. I drank abusively until I was in my early 40s. And by that, I mean I drank to get drunk. I never could wrap my mind around people who like were just having a drink to relax or they just wanted one. Like that made no sense to me. The reason that you drank was to get drunk. I from 14 to 24, I was pretty much high or trying to get high or sleeping. It doesn't mean that I stopped by any means after that, but I started going to school after that. So I had to not be high constantly. And I did my weed kind of waxed and waned over the years, but I did, I smoked weed for a very, very long time. Um, when I got into recovery, okay, actually, let me just stop there and say when the drinking slowed way down in my early 40s, it wasn't because I made a decision to quit. I just sort of stopped. It just kind of happened. Same thing with the cigarettes, right? It was really kind of at the same time. And I realized one day, I'm like, oh, I gotta have a drink for a while. So I just made a decision. Okay, I think I'm just gonna stop for now. And I just stayed stopped for like a year. And after that, I drank from time to time and probably got a buzz, maybe like 4 times. I don't think I ever got drunk after that. And then when I got in recovery, especially for compulsive overeating, like was allowed to have one drink and then had an episode where just by the influence of the alcohol decided I could have extra food. So drinking went on my abstinence list. So no more alcohol for me. So that would have been probably the fall of 2017. Um, I did continue to smoke weed from time to time. And then in the summer of 2019 realized that I needed to quit because it was becoming, something that I really wanted to do. And I remember thinking like, I should tell my sponsor. I'm like, I don't want to tell my sponsor. I'm like, why don't I want to tell my sponsor? Oh, I don't want to tell my sponsor because I don't want to stop. So as soon as I told her, I stopped and it was fine. And my sponsor is actually my OA sponsor, and she happens to also be in ACA. But so I have been completely clean and sober from alcohol and drugs. And so that would be the summer of 2019. So 4.5 years. I've been abstinent with the food for 8.5 years. So really actually feeling my feelings instead of numbing them. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about my recovery now. So, what happened for me is that I started going to therapy when I was probably about 15. I got introduced to the whole self help genre when I was 22 or 23 years old and have read voraciously in that genre. And I still do to this day. I've done, I did lots of dieting and fitness and health stuff, and I've done workshops and retreats and spiritual groups and support groups and you name it. I was always trying to do something. And I think of all of that stuff as having scratched the surface of the iceberg of my life. And then when I got into 12-step recovery in 2015, when I was 52, it really melted the iceberg of my life. I think a lot of that has to do with the technology of the 12 steps of recovery are simply amazing. The fact that it's a spiritual program and that we do it in groups with other people going on the same journey is pretty amazing. And then also, I think it has to do with the trauma recovery, which I will talk about in a few moments. Like, I didn't know that I had trauma. So, what landed me in recovery was in 2015. I had befriended a guy named Dan from my church. Dan was homeless. And after a couple, 2, 3 months of friendship, one day there was a really big snowstorm here in New Haven, Connecticut. And I invited him to stay at my home instead of at the homeless shelter. And, now it's pretty obvious. Like most people don't invite homeless people to stay in their home. And I just thought I was nice. I was being helpful to him. And so he stayed. And then I invited him another time and another time. And in a few weeks, he was practically living with me. And I soon felt trapped in my own home. Dan was an alcoholic and an addict. I think now he may have also had some kind of personality disorder because this guy fucked with my head in a way I had never experienced. He made me feel like I was crazy, that I was an awful person. I mean, he would just turn on a dime. I mean, it was just absolutely awful. So one day I was talking about Dan in therapy. And by the way, if you're watching this on video, see my mug. It says parental advisory. I say fuck a lot. When I saw this, I had to get it. So anyway, I'm talking about Dan in therapy, and in the middle of a sentence, I go, "Oh my God, do you think I need to go to Al-Anon?" And my therapist was like, "Yes." So whatever I put into Google, I came up with the word codependent, and I was like, "What? Like, how is this possible that there's this concept, codependence, that I've never heard of, given all the work that I've been doing and all the therapists that I've worked with for almost 40 years?" And I remember saying to my therapist, what the fuck else don't I know? Like, I was just so blindsided by this concept. And she said, Barb, I think for you that codependence is a unifying concept. It pulls together a bunch of things you did know about yourself. You just didn't know that they were related to each other. And at first, I thought she was saying it to be nice. And then as I got to know more, I realized that it was probably true. So I started going to Codependence Anonymous very quickly. I remember feeling a sense of relief, I think partly from understanding there's this sort of like syndrome-y kind of thing called codependence that applies to me. There's a program of recovery. I'm not the only person like this. People do recover from this. And it was really incredible. And I very soon, like maybe like 3 weeks in, I remember saying to somebody who could very well have been Dan, I think I need to be reparented. But I thought I made that term reparenting up. I have no idea where I got it. And then 6 weeks into going to CODA, I went away to go visit some friends, one of whom had been in AA for 10 years at that point. And since I'd met her, she had just raved about how utterly transformed her life had been because of AA. So I was like, oh, you're going to love this. I'm going to Codependence Anonymous. So I'm in recovery too. She was like, oh my God, this is great. Let's see if we can find a CODA meeting while you're here and we'll go. Well, she couldn't, but she found an ACA meeting, which I knew of as ACOA, Adult Children of Alcoholics. I didn't think I qualified. So I was like, I'll go for you, because that's what I'm like. I'm a self-sacrificing person. Her dad's an alcoholic. So we go to the meeting and I learned that it's actually called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. I hadn't heard that and dysfunctional families part before. That I qualify for. And in the opening reading, one of the things they said, it's actually in the solution, which is we become our own loving parents. So they said we reparent ourselves. And I was like, what? And then they read the 14 traits of an adult child, which we affectionately call the laundry list. And I was like, holy shit. Now, Heidi tells me I sobbed the whole meeting. I don't remember that, but I do remember buying the literature, coming home to New Haven, Connecticut, going to an ACA meeting, and starting to read the literature and being like, holy shit, holy shit. Like I'm flipping the pages going, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. This is what happened. This is what happened. This is what happened. And I didn't know something, quote, happened to me. But here I am reading it on the pages of this book. I remember thinking, like, were they filming the inside of my head? It was explaining my experiences and my life and my feelings in ways that I had just never heard before. And a few weeks later, an additional women's ACA meeting started in New Haven. I still go to that meeting. And then a few weeks after that, me and 3 other women started working the 12 steps through the ACA 12-step workbook. And I was astonished at how quickly things were changing for me and what I was learning and understanding and how I was growing and changing. Meanwhile, I continued to go to a CODA meeting every week, but I wasn't I wasn't working the steps, but really that's not like there was a couple women in that meeting that were, and I knew that because they met at the church before the meeting, but I didn't really hear people talking about the steps. I didn't hear people really talking about sponsorship. I heard a couple people say they had a sponsor, but it wasn't clear like what they were doing with their sponsor and all that kind of stuff. And in ACA around here, there was nobody that had a sponsor. And this was the way that we were doing it, the small group, was how people were doing the recovery. But I mean, I was shocked, and I was also seeing the recovery around me. And so I did that for like a year, and I decided about a year into it that I was going to let go of CODA because there was some stuff happening in the meeting that just didn't feel right. And it just really never felt like the right fit. It was more like a 75% fit, whereas ACA was 100% fit. And around this same time, I was also recovering from rotator cuff surgery, which was absolutely brutal. And I was hitting bottom with sugar, which I didn't know. So one of the women I was doing the 12 steps with in ACA had started going to Overeaters Anonymous. And prior to that, she was talking about her relationship with food, especially sugar, and her cravings and the thinking and the behavior. And I remember being like, oh my God, but it wasn't like, oh my God, what she was doing. It was that she was talking about it. Cause I was like, holy shit, I think like that. I do like that. Like, oh my God, I can't believe she's talking about this. And she was trying to 12-step me into OA very gently. I didn't really realize it. And then on Wednesday, April 20th, 2016, I woke up feeling like I was being internally electrocuted by sugar. And I texted her and I was like, listen, I just have to tell somebody that just today, I'm not having sugar. And I haven't had sugar since that day. Now, in the meantime, I decided to scroll back and look at a message she had sent me earlier that week, which I thought when I got the message that it said, hey, do you want to go to an OA workshop on abstinence with me on June 1st? Now, mind you, this is in April. So when I got it, I was like, June, I don't know. So I said, maybe. But when I looked back at it, it didn't say on June 1st. It said Saturday at 1. Like that is how crazy my head was that I thought Saturday at 1 said on June 1st. So I texted her. I was like, I think I want to go to this with you. Now, I think that I'm going to a weekly OA support meeting. I don't know what workshop on abstinent means. So I said, where do you want me to meet you? And she said, I'll pick you up at noon. I'm like, noon? Like, where the hell is this meeting? So she said, it's in Berlin. And I'm like, Berlin? Like, I'm thinking, like, this is New Haven. There's got to be a closer meeting than that. But whatever. So she picks me up. And I get in the car. She's like, thank you so much for coming to support me. And I was like, listen, let's be clear. This is for moi. And then she says, by the way, it's 3 hours. I was like, what? 3 hours? She goes, that's okay. We don't have to stay the whole time. So we go to the meeting, and like 45 minutes into it, I look at her and I'm like, I'm cool with staying. How about you? And she was like, absolutely. So the very first speaker was this guy named Don C. And if you are in OA recovery, you've probably heard of him by now. He's been in the program for like 40 years. He was instrumental in the second edition of the OA 12 and 12. He has helped revitalize like 5 different intergroups. I think all of them are somewhere like in the Northeast region of the country, but he's well known. And he says, I'm down 185 pounds for over 30 years. And I was like, whoa, holy shit, you've got my attention. So I had worked for Weight Watchers previously, and the statistics at Weight Watchers are that 95% of people gain their weight back. So this man is telling me he's kept his weight off for 30 years. So you've got my attention. Number 2, he's lost 185 pounds and kept it off. And up to that point, the only people I had ever met that had lost over 100 pounds, all of them had had the surgery, and 9 of the 10 of them had gained it back. So he really grabbed my attention. This is why it is so important to share your story with newcomers. This is why it's important to, just quickly let them identify with you. And he said he dropped a bunch of gems, one of which was, it's none of my business what other people think of me. What is my business is what I think of me. And I was like, whoa, wait, what? Because I had heard it's none of my business what other people think of me from this guy, Bruce. Bruce and I had been in a spiritual sharing circle through our church many years before that. Bruce was a longtime AA guy and was always dropping these AA gems. And that one in particular, I couldn't wrap my mind around. What do you mean it's none of my business what other people think of me? And every time I would think of it for like the next 15 years, I was like, I don't even know what that means. So here Don is saying, what is my business is what I think of me. Now, I don't think I fully understood what that meant in the moment, but I was like, there's something here for me. And it turns out that was everything to me because my core wound is codependence. And so I've been externally focused on what does he think? What does she think? What are they doing? What is he doing? What does she need? What do they need? What does the organization need? What do the people need? What does the cause need? So super focused externally that it never occurred to me to think about, what do I think of me? And that's why it was baffling to me because I was so externally focused. And that was a game changer. Another thing I remember him saying that when he got into recovery, his sponsor, he was talking to his sponsor. He goes, this sounds like brainwashing. And his sponsor was like, well, maybe your brain is dirty and it needs some washing, which I thought was really funny. And it's pretty clear that's what most of us, and we have stinking thinking and we need to clean our brains. We need our brains washed. Then Don proceeded to do a presentation on the cycle of addiction as it applies to food. And I was like, oh, I'm a compulsive overeater. I didn't even know that was a thing. Never mind that I was a compulsive overeater. And so it was just, mind blowing to me. And I remember It was probably 3 days after that workshop that it even occurred to me that I might lose weight. It was so clear to me that the obsession, the thinking, could go away. And that was the thing that was killing me at the time. Well, the very next speaker was this woman named Kimberly, and she got up and she said a couple things that really, really stuck with me. One was, she said, on my way here, I saw this bumper sticker. Maybe you've seen it. And the bumper sticker says, when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything feels or looks like a nail. And she said, well, the OA spin on that is, if the only tool you have is food, everything feels like hunger. And I was like, oh my God, that explains it. Because there have been so many times when I've eaten what I know is plenty of food, and yet I feel hungry. And I'm not talking about some psychological sense of hunger. I'm talking about a hollowness in my belly, sometimes a rumbling, sometimes weakness. And I think what happened for me is that the connection between my stomach and my brain got disconnected somehow. And I also think that my emotions manifest themselves as hunger. I think that that has been repaired to a certain degree in my years of abstinence. But I was like, wow, that really, really helps me a lot. And then another thing she said was, when I came into this program, I knew for a fact that I would be having sugar again. And I was like, tell it, sister. And then she said, and here I am, abstinent from sugar for 30 years, one day at a time. And I was like, whoa, okay, first of all, she tricked me. And secondly, I was like, wait a minute, she was abstinent for 30 years, but she did it one day at a time. And somehow hearing it like that just really landed with me. And that really helped me. My first year and a half, I had lots of cravings, lots of hunger pangs. And I would tell myself I can have it tomorrow. I meant it. And then I would wake up the next morning sane, and I would commit that I wasn't going to eat. And I made it. And anyway, so I ended up getting a whole bunch of brochures, which I read immediately when I got home. I also grabbed a meeting list, and I found out that there was a Monday night downtown New Haven meeting, and I started going to that. And that seemed like a divine intervention to me, because that CODA meeting I had let go of was on Monday nights. And when I let go of it, I was like, I think I'm going to pick up another ACA meeting, because there was one in Guilford, which is a couple towns away, on Monday nights. And I went to that, and I just thought, that's what I'm going to do. And then it turned out, nope, God wants me to go to the Monday night downtown New Haven meeting. I still go to that. It is now an online meeting only. It is no longer in person. And I was in the program actually really quickly. I think it was my friend that 12 stepped me, turned me on to OA podcasts. I wasn't familiar with podcasts. And I started listening to them literally every day for my first 2.5 years in OA. I listened to OA podcasts every single day. I listened to them in the morning when I was getting ready, when I was making dinner at night, when I was getting ready for bed. I just literally immersed myself. And because I only went to one in-person meeting, that is where I got the majority of my experience, strength, and hope from OA, was from the podcast. And one of the things I kept hearing was, to find a sponsor, you need to find someone who has what you want and ask how he or she got it. Whereas in ACA, there's many ways to work a program of recovery, but in addiction programs, you get a sponsor, they take you through the steps, and that's how it works. In ACA, sometimes you don't work the steps right away. Sometimes you do reparenting work, or sometimes feeling work, or grief work, but eventually you do the steps. But you can do it through, we have a Ready, Set, Go program. There's a quick steps thing. There's step studies. There are fellow travelers. There are step groups. There's also doing it with a sponsor. There's multiple ways to do it. But in OA, it's like you get a sponsor and they take you through the steps. So the problem was that I was only going to the one meeting, and the only person who had what I wanted was a guy. And at the time, I thought I couldn't have a sponsor who was a man. I now know that's bullshit. My second sponsor was a man, and I have 6 sponsees in total in recovery. 3 are men, 3 are women. And it's just, the gender thing has never been a problem. I can see how it would be for some people, but it's just not for me. And so, plus that guy had like 10 sponsees, so it wasn't really going to work out. And so one day, I decided to take my notes from that very first workshop, which I wrote on the back of a bunch of flyers that I got from that workshop, because I didn't bring a notebook, I decided to copy them down into a recovery notebook. And as I was copying them down, I'm like, you know what? I know who I want to be my sponsor. This woman, Kimberly, the woman that talked about the bumper sticker. So I started saying to people, hey, does anybody know Kimberly? She's married to Don C. I really need to find her. And then in October of 2016, there was an OA convention in Boston. It was like the world convention that only happens like 4 times, every 4 years. And so I was like, I'm going to that because when is it going to be this close again? And so I went to it and there she was. She went. So in OA, when they do the workshops, like the main speakers speak and then they allow the audience to come up and do 3-minute pitches. So it's either like questions or responses or whatever. And she was doing a 3-minute pitch. So I literally chased her down after I saw her. I went and I sat behind her. I tapped her on the shoulder. I'm like, when this is over, can I talk to you? So I talked to her briefly and I told her the story. I was like, you were at my very first meeting. You said this stuff, like you were who I want as a sponsor. So she said, let's meet for coffee. So we met for coffee later. Excuse me. Speaking of coffee, well, I don't drink coffee, but anyway, I needed a drink. So she said, okay, I've room 1 hour time slot for a sponsee and it's at 8 o'clock on Saturday mornings. I was like, oh shit. I'm like, oh, I'll take it. I'll take it. So she took me through the 12 steps. And this is what she said to me. She said, listen, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to take you through the 12 steps. And when we're done, you're going to move on and get another sponsor. And I'm going to move on and get another sponsee. That may seem selfish of me, but that's what I need to do to keep me in the steps because that is where the recovery is. So let me tell you something. When you've got someone with 30 years of recovery and all they do is take people through the steps over and over and over again, like they have seen it all and they're not taking shit from anybody. So I really needed her. She was amazing. She took me through the steps using the AA Big Book, the OA 12 and 12, and the AA 12 and 12. And she had compiled a series of questions over the years from a variety of sources that she would email me every week. I would write them. She would told me, I'm going to give you a reading assignment. You're going to read the same reading every night that week. And you're going to write something different like each time because every time you read it, it's going to land differently. So I thought the first week we met, I was going to share my insights. No, she wanted me to read every single word I wrote to her. And it was really an incredible process. And so I was still working the 12 steps in ACA with my group. That actually took me 2.25 years to do. The first year we met every single week. So if one of us went away on vacation, we actually called in to the group and did the work. The second year we allowed ourselves, like if someone's on vacation, let's just not meet that week. So it took us like 2.25 years. And so that first 2 years, I did the steps 2 times, really like very deeply and was deeply and profoundly changed. And, as I mentioned, I felt like all that other shit that I did, that other self-development, like scratched the surface of the iceberg of my life and recovery melted the iceberg of my life. So for me, the 12 steps are where it's at, which is why I do this podcast, because there is so much wisdom here. And so, from the very beginning, my top 3 tools have been pausing, reaching out, and keeping the focus on myself. So I'm just going to touch on them briefly, but I have put them in the show notes because I have a podcast episode about each one of those. So pausing, learning how to pause was monumental for me. And you can learn how I did that in that episode. But I can't use any of my other tools if I don't pause. I can't allow my higher power to enter the situation if I haven't paused. I also can't stop and breathe and calm down and get out of fight or flight mode if I'm not paused. Because when we're in fight or flight mode, we can't think clearly. We're not meant to. We're meant to fight or flee. So all of the energy, the massive amount of energy that goes to the frontal lobe that is used for thinking has to be redirected to the mechanisms of the body that fight or flee. So pausing is crucial. And then my second most important tool of recovery is learning to reach out for help. And I mean that both in terms of reaching out to other people and reaching out to my higher power. So I could not ask for help when I first got into recovery because I'm the helper. I'm the one that helps people. It just like I literally remember feeling like I'm going to die at the thought of asking someone for help. And It was a very humbling experience to learn how to ask for help from people. It's absolutely crucial. Like you're not going to make it, and you're not going to make it in life, really, but you're definitely not going to make it in recovery if you don't eventually learn to ask for help. But it's part of the process of recovery. And I now am able to and willing to ask for help and accept help for sure. And it's really incredible. And then I've also learn to reach out to my higher power. And before I get into that, I want to say that, I grew up agnostic my entire life. And my family stopped going to church when I was 6, so I never even like went to confirmation. We stopped even talking about church or religion or spirituality, except for my older brother. He's a year and a half older than me. I think he was a staunch atheist from the womb, and he just was like, no God, no God. And I was always like, something's going on here. I don't know what it is. But then everything that I heard about religion just really turned me off, and it just seemed bullshit to me. So I was agnostic, which my understanding is, like I questioned the existence of God until I was in my mid 30s and I read the book Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. And I came to come up with my own conception of God because it answered all of my questions to my satisfaction. And after that, I identified as a pretty spiritual person and I got much more into different spiritual practices and all that kind of stuff. And then when I got into recovery, my spirituality just absolutely magnified. I developed a personal relationship with God. That's what I choose to call my higher power. And I started handing things over. Actually, in the beginning, I shoved things over to my higher power. I asked for guidance. I asked God, show me your will for me and give me the power to carry that out. So I used God in ways that I just didn't before. And I remember like feeling like things were actually lifted from me. The first few times it was like they were lifted for like 3.5 seconds, but the fact that they could be lifted at all was just absolutely astonishing. So that has been utterly transformative. And obviously, my business is called Higher Power Coaching and Consulting. I'm higher powered. That is really how I operate in the world. I wish I could be higher powered 24/7. I have multiple, many, many times a day conscious contact with my higher power. I still wish that I could be like plugged in, constantly, but I can't. So that reaching out has been absolutely enormous. And then the third most important tool for me personally is keeping the focus on myself. And this is because my core wound is codependence. And so that means I've always been externally focused. What is he doing? What is she doing? What are they doing? Never paying attention to me. This is why thinking it's none of my business what other people think of me was like, just what? It just didn't make any sense to me because I couldn't focus on myself. I was so focused outside of myself that I didn't even give any credence at all to, I didn't even think about what do I think of me. So those are my top 3 tools. I have the episodes 8, 9, and 10 linked in the show notes about each one of those tools. I'm not going to link a bunch of other episodes because, basically my podcast is my experience, strength, and hope. But what I want to do now is talk about what I've learned. So in step 12 in recovery, we say, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others who suffer and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So this spiritual awakening is really important. So I think it might be the AA 12 and 12 that says one definition of a spiritual awakening is to do, feel, and believe that which we could not before recovery. The way I think of it is it gives me like a spiritual awakening is the ability to be, see, think, do, and have that which I could not be, see, think, do, and have before recovery. In other words, I am changed. I am profoundly and deeply changed in ways that none of the other things, all of the other things I did before, didn't even touch. They didn't even scratch the surface. I would call that a spiritual awakening. You do not have to be a quote spiritual person. You don't have to believe in the afterlife or deity or anything like that. But you do have to believe in some power greater than you because our problem is lack of power. And when you have a lack of power, the way that you deal with it is to get a power greater than you. So my spiritual awakening is that I'm able to do, be, see, think, and have many, many, many things that I couldn't do before. And then, my job as a person in recovery is to carry the message of recovery to those who still suffer and to practice these principles in all my affairs. So what that means is, I carry the message personally through, my 12-step work in recovery, by being a sponsor, by going to meetings, by giving service. I do it through my podcast. And then I also carry the message of recovery as a codependent through my boundaries coaching and my speaking work. So there are so many people out there that don't know that their lives could be massively improved if they learned how to build healthy boundaries. And so I carry the message in that way. And then practicing these principles in all my affairs basically means I live a spiritually centered life. Technically, it's talking about the spiritual principles that are aligned with each of the steps in the traditions. But, for an individual, it means living your life in alignment with your values, which is what I try to do. So now I want to share some of my spiritual awakening with you. So the first one that I would call an actual spiritual awakening, at the time I didn't, I called it an epiphany. It was when I was doing step one with that first OA sponsor, and I was writing about the unmanageability of my life. And so I started to list out all the ways in which my life was unmanageable. And I was like, oh my God, I literally cannot run one aspect of my life: food, drugs, alcohol, relationships, work, home life. But like every single part of my life is a mess. And I started laughing so hard. I was doing my step work in my bed that I had to hold my ribs. You know how when you laugh so hard that you have to hold your ribs? I was rolling back and forth on my bed, just laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing because it was so ridiculous that I've been walking around in my life giving unsolicited advice to other people, thinking I know what's best and you should listen to me. And yet I don't know how to run one fucking area of my life properly. Like, who do I think I am? And it was on reflection as this sunk into me that I realized that was a spiritual awakening. That was an actual moment. Most of my spiritual awakenings have been of the educational variety, where we get insight after insight after insight over time. So, one way that I've awakened is I've learned that what other people are doing, thinking, saying, even what they're not doing, is none of my business. This is really helpful to know in a romantic relationship. I can see so clearly now in my relationship with my sweetheart that I was in the business of my other, previous boyfriends all the time, especially around their houses. Like, if I didn't think they should have this here or do this like that, I would be like, basically, you need to do things my way. And it's just none of my business. Like, most of what's going on in the world is not my business. I love the notion of like, is it in my hula hoop? Well, if it's in my hula hoop, then it's my business. And if it's not, then it's none of my business. And that has been huge for me. Um, so one of the things I tell all of my clients, especially when we first start, is that the core thing that enabled me to go from having no boundaries for 50 something years to having healthy boundaries, and such healthy boundaries that I am a coach to help other people build boundaries, is that I've come to care more what I think of me than what other people do. So this harkens back to what Don said about it's none of your business what other people think of you. It's what's your business is what you think of you. So what I mean by this is not, I don't give a shit what people think about me. Not true. Of course, I care to a certain degree what people think of me, but I care less what you all think of me than what I think of me. Whereas I didn't pay any attention to that before. So what this means is I used to be willing to lie and manipulate, that's what people pleasing is, to get you to like me. And I'm no longer willing to do that. It's more important for me to be an honest woman of integrity than it is for me to have you like me. So if you're going to do something to get someone to approve of you and you feel really good about it, have at it. But if you're going to do something to get someone to approve of you and you feel like shit about it, then don't do it, because your integrity matters and you're in charge of it and you can't get that back. when you live out of integrity. So I care more what I think about me than what you think about me. It's really helped me to hear things like, if someone must be disappointed, it shouldn't be me. Like, I don't want anybody to be disappointed, but if it's between you and me, well, it's going to be you. Whereas my entire life, I was the one who I took the disappointment. Um, I realize also that, like, I used to think I'm nice. I thought that did all these helpful things because I was a nice person. Now I know, like, no, I did it because I wanted people's approval. It doesn't mean that I wasn't nice or that I wasn't helpful and I didn't want to be helpful. I did. But just wanting to be helpful doesn't explain how I got to the point where I was burnt out and I was resentful and probably talking about you and saying things like people taking advantage of me. Like, if you're just doing something to be helpful, then, you'll stop when it becomes painful or like you're resentful and stuff. So I was more invested in other people thinking that I was helpful than I was in actually being helpful. In other words, I was more focused on what they thought of me than what I thought of myself. One of the sayings in recovery that's really, really helped me a lot, especially early in recovery, it's this. If I am disturbed, there is something wrong with me. So what this does not mean that I'm inherently flawed and I'm broken. That's not what it means. And it doesn't mean nobody did anything. What it means is, if I'm disturbed and I want to be undisturbed, then I am the one that needs to fix that. I don't need to go around and try to fix the world, because I can't do that. I can only fix me or change me. So if there's something wrong with me, it's probably a thinking pattern, to be honest with you. Another one, acceptance is the answer to my problem today. I did not know how unaccepting I was of the world. I think the other way to think of that is, I had wildly unrealistic expectations of myself, other people, and the world. And I've learned that acceptance is the answer to my problem today. It doesn't mean I have to like things the way they are. It means I get to stop fighting against them. And then all of that energy that I was putting into fighting can now be put into taking responsibility for my life and living my life the way that I want to. Um, a huge part of my people pleasing behavior was because I was afraid of being judged by other people, afraid of being rejected and abandoned by other people. And so I didn't want people to judge me. And so I did all these people pleasing behaviors, and I put up all these different facades and acted like I liked things that I didn't and all that sort of thing. And I eventually realized, well, wait a minute, humans are judging, discerning creatures. We make judgments about the world and other people. People are going to judge me. So, how about if I get judged by the actual authentic Barb, or as the actual authentic Barb, rather than some fake version of Barb? And so I kind of let go of the facades little by little and over time. And then the other thing is that my own judgment, I judged myself, I judged other people, I judged my circumstances, and I learned to stop judging myself so much. I'm going to talk in a moment about how that shifted for me. And when I stopped judging myself so much, I stopped judging other people. And then I found that I judge my circumstances. That is one that I still have difficulty with at times. I really don't think I'm judgmental of myself anymore. I'm definitely still judgmental of other people, but nothing like I used to be. And I also keep my mouth shut about it. Circumstances a little bit harder for me, but a couple of sayings I learned in recovery really helped me with the judgment, especially of others, but also of myself. So one is info, not ammo. I've talked about this many times. So the idea is, this is information for you to learn, integrate, and grow from. It is not ammunition for you to beat the shit out of yourself, because that doesn't really work. And so when I learned this is info, not ammo, I realized, wow, I was kind of like scanning the horizon at all times, like looking for places to beat myself up, even though I always thought of myself as a woman of high self-esteem who was positive and optimistic and glass half full and all that kind of stuff. And so I started saying, okay, how can I learn and grow from this? And then I heard the term flossom, which is like the antidote to black and white thinking, because I internalized this idea that I was not supposed to have flaws. And if I did, then I definitely needed to hide them. Thus, some of the facades that I had. So when I started to internalize this idea that I could be flawsome, so I could be both flawed and awesome, they weren't mutually exclusive terms. I started to be more accepting of myself and started to relax and allow myself to make mistakes and have flaws and share them with other people, which meant I could let people in. And I stopped judging myself so much. And when I stopped judging myself so much, it made me a lot more accepting and less judgmental of other people. And so those two terms have really, really helped me a lot. Um, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about boundaries here because I have like 40 something episodes about boundaries. But I think because they're the antidote to codependence, and that's my core wound, they've been such a game changer for me that I have boundaries so that I can protect myself from myself, from lobbing bombs into my own life and from other people. So I can't go the rest of my life without ever being triggered again, but I can minimize the opportunities for being triggered by setting boundaries in my life. And, boundaries really permeate every single area of our lives. It's one of the reasons I became a boundaries coach, because they can have such a profound effect on every single area of our life. And I want to help people with that. I learned to stop gossiping. Who knew that talking negatively about my boss behind her back for like 19 years was gossip? Like, that's kind of the definition of gossip, but I didn't realize that that was what I was doing. And that's because I was in denial, about my dysfunctional behavior. In my family, we talked about other people. You talked about people. You didn't go to the person you had a problem with and talk directly to them, God forbid. So I've learned, gossip has been huge for me because I was focused on other people. I was blaming other people for my problems and perpetuating all that shit, creating chaos and all that sort of thing. Um, One thing that has been really wonderful for me is being able to say, I don't know about something. Like, I just could not do that before recovery. I just grew up with the idea that I was supposed to know things. I was supposed to have an answer for everything. I remember getting asked one time, I think by a boss, like, do you have to have an answer for everything? And I remember thinking, like, yeah, don't you? Like, what? Of course. And it was like, basically, make it up if you don't know the answer to something. And now I'm like, it's like, I still sometimes get giddy when I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know, and I'm not going to find out. I pretty much walked around my entire life with a sense of urgency at all times. I didn't even know that until I heard somebody say sense of urgency. I was like, holy shit. I think now that I had low level anxiety my entire life, but didn't know it because it was like, water to fish. I mentioned, I always thought of myself as an optimistic, positive person. I learned in recovery that I catastrophize about the future. I ruminate over the past. Had lots of negative stuff going on in my head, even though I've always been a positive, optimistic person, that other stuff was going on too. And I've been able to clean that up. I don't think that I ruminate anymore. I definitely still catastrophize, but nowhere near to the degree that I used to. And this last year, I've done a lot to clean up even what's left of that. Um, one of the things that we talk about in ACA is become an actor rather than a reactor in our life. So this doesn't mean an actor like you're play acting. It means you are being proactive, having agency in your life rather than reacting to what life gives you. You take some responsibility for your life. And this has been huge for me, that I don't just assume like I've got to deal with whatever's happening. I just my whole life thought I just had to put up with shit. And I did. Another thing was becoming honest. I truly thought I was an honest person when I got in recovery. My God, I lied about cigarettes and drugs and alcohol and relationships. Mostly I lied in the people pleasing department. And so honesty has become extremely important to me because it's kind of the slippery slope. If I start lying, I'm probably going to start drinking and drugging again sometime soon. Huge lesson for me was understanding I don't have to believe my thoughts. Like, just because I think something doesn't mean it's true. And that was like, what? I mean, oh my God. So unlike many people in recovery, I tend to be on the arrogant side than on the low self-esteem side. And so I would have thoughts like, well, if people would only do things my way, then everything would be okay. And I still do have thoughts like that from time to time. It's not constant the way it used to be. And now I know to question it. Sometimes it takes me an hour or two or a day or two to realize, oh, this is an arrogant thought. It's not necessarily true. But the idea that I don't have to believe something, or just because I think something doesn't mean that it's true, and that, come like undoing my distorted thinking and challenging my limiting beliefs is a gigantic part of my recovery. So this has been really huge. And then coming out of victim mentality has been the biggest paradigm shift of my recovery. So most people, when they think of someone with victim mentality, is that they're like, woe is me, the world is against me, I can never win. That is not my variety of victim mentality. Mine was much more subtle than that, where I was like blaming and complaining about things. The way that I first saw it was when I did my relationship inventory in ACA. And I'm a heterosexual woman, so I date men. So like every single man on that list, I was like, well, if he would just XYZ, then everything would be okay. And if he would have just, and if he would have just, and I started to see like, oh my God, I thought that about every relationship. So I was basically saying, I have nothing to do with the status of the relationships that I've been in, every one of them. Like I'm the common denominator in them. And what's really funny about that is that I used to, when I would talk with friends about their relation, when they were bitching about their relationships, whether they were men or women, I would say something like, you're 50% of that relationship, which means you are 50% responsible for the status of the relationship. So I could see that about other people's relationships, but I couldn't see it about mine. But it showed me that I'm acting like I've got nothing to do with the status of my relationship. And it sort of opened the door for me to see that this is victim mentality. And I want to say, I have like 7 or 8 or 9 episodes on victim mentality, because as it comes to the surface for me, I record more episodes. I'm not going to link those in the show notes, but um this is really, really huge, and it means we get to take responsibility for our lives. But the reason we have it is because we've probably been victimized in some capacity. So there's a difference between being victimized and internalizing that mentality. And if you want to know more, then you can listen to my other episodes about that. I did an enormous amount of isolating, as I think everybody in recovery does. And I learned that that's really a form of self abandonment. And I think, isolation is very different than healthy alone time or solitude. So in isolation, we're like fending off the world and we're using a lot of energy to like push the world away. Whereas when we're in solitude, we're probably doing something to energize ourselves and or rest and relax and regenerate. And in my first year of recovery, there was a woman in OA who said, I'm obsessive and compulsive in isolation and I heal in community. And I really, really internalized that. I think it's so, so true. I've lived alone most of my adult life. I've done a shit ton of isolating. And boy, the pandemic really did a number on many of us. I happen to be someone who thrived because I was already working from home anyway. And so I had a setup, and then my sweetheart and I decided that we were going to continue to get together. So I wasn't 100% isolated, but I have found myself in the last few months needing to get more and more out in the world, because now I only work for myself and I work from home. So I need to make sure that I'm getting out in the world. And I even have a friend coming here regularly to co-work with me, and I've invited a couple other people to do it too. And so I want to heal in community, which is where, recovery comes in. And then I heard this quote recently, which was, loneliness isn't about lack of company. It's about lack of purpose. And that really resonated with me, that, I get to take responsibility and do something in the world and have some kind of purpose. And speaking of that, recovery has given me the purpose, which is, carry the message of recovery to those who still suffer. I also learned to trust myself. I did not trust myself, especially in the boyfriend picking and holding on to department. And I learned to build trust with myself. And the way that I learned to do it was through building healthy boundaries. So I learned, to show up for myself and follow through for myself in ways that I never did before, which meant I learned to be trusting, and I learned what it was like to be trustworthy. And so I got to use those powers out in the world and be able to discern who are the people that I can be trusting of, who is trustworthy. And I learned that's something that takes time. It's a pattern of behavior. And so I've learned to be discerning and to trust people who have proven to me that they're trustworthy. A gigantic part of recovery in ACA is coming out of denial. So, what that means for ACA recovery, usually denial means that I say this so and so isn't true. But in this kind of denial, we're talking about that we start to realize that things we thought were normal are not, that things we thought were okay are dysfunctional or possibly even traumatic. We start to put things together that we never saw as related before. We start to remember things that we never did before. So many of us in recovery have huge swaths of our lives that we don't remember, sometimes because we were inebriated, sometimes because we were dissociated, sometimes because we were traumatized. And what I see in recovery and what I experience in recovery is that our psyches don't allow us to remember things that we're not ready to handle, and that as we become farther and farther in recovery, the denial sort of lifts. And so I think that's all I want to share in terms of my spiritual awakening and carrying the message. Like some of the messages, I have whatever 299 other episodes of stuff, but um I do want to say something about carrying the message, and that is that, we learned from Bill W. that the reason that we carry the message is, yeah, we want other people to recover. Of course we do, but we do it first and foremost for ourselves. So, I heard the story that, Bill came home one day and he was all demoralized and he said to Lois, I've been carrying the message for 6 months and nobody is staying sober. And she said, actually, somebody is, and it's you. And that's when he realized that carrying the message is an integral part of sustaining our recovery. So I carry the message in recovery, like as a sponsor and as someone who gives service in recovery, because I want to hold on to my recovery. Of course, I want other people to recover, but I'm not going to give service to my detriment. So I'm not going to overdo it. And I'm not going to work with somebody who's like toxic or triggering to me. I carry the message through my podcast because, like I said, recovery melted the iceberg of my life, and I want that for other people. And I live and breathe recovery. So there's no way, or it's not that there's no way I'm going to relapse, but I have way less chances of relapsing. And then I carry the message of recovery from codependence as a boundaries coach and as a speaker, because I want other women, especially professional women, to understand they actually have the ability to have way more control over their lives, which means taking responsibility for our lives and letting go of having so much or trying to have so much responsibility for other people. So instead of trying to carpet the entire world, we put slippers on our own feet. So I want to thank you so much for being a loyal listener. And again, if you have not already written a review for me on Apple, please take a moment to do that, especially for this episode to celebrate my 300 episodes. If you are a Spotify listener, then please give me a 5-star rating. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube, I would love to read your comments. Just go ahead and plop comments in there and you can put, do a thumbs up, subscribe. At this point, I don't have a ton of stuff. I do have my episodes on YouTube now that Google Podcast is gone, but I do have some other videos, and I'm going to be doing more and more as time goes on. But would love to hear from you, and I cannot thank you enough for being a listener and for allowing me to share my experience, strength, and hope with you.